7 years. That's how long Elena Cross had kept her secret sealed so tight it had become part of her breathing, something she did without thinking, something that kept her alive. She was standing at the kitchen counter frosting a birthday cake when she heard the engines. Not one engine, several. Deep, expensive, the kind that don't idle at stop signs because they never have to stop for anything. She put down the spatula, the frosting knife, wiped her hands on the dish towel that had a faded lighthouse printed on it, the one Noah had picked out at the gift shop 2 summers ago because he said lighthouses were basically just buildings that refused to give up. She walked to the front window and looked out. 3 matte black SUVs sat at the curb in front of her house. Then a 4th turned the corner, slow and deliberate, like a period at the end of a sentence. Neighbors were already stopping on sidewalks. Mrs. Heller from across the street had frozen mid-walk with her terrier. The dog was barking. Nobody was moving. Elena's hands had stopped working. Her lungs hadn't caught up yet. The rear door of the middle vehicle opened. He stepped out wearing a charcoal jacket, no tie, silver threading his temples that hadn't been there 7 years ago. He was holding a gift wrapped in dark blue paper with a white ribbon tied in a knot that was slightly crooked, like someone who didn't usually wrap gifts had tried very hard and still gotten it slightly wrong. He looked up at her house. He looked straight at her window. His first words, when he finally spoke across the quiet street, were not an apology, they were not a question. I've spent 7 years searching for my son. If you've ever made a decision in a single moment that you've spent every year since trying to outrun, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the story you're about to hear doesn't let up, and you don't want to miss what happens next. The party balloons were still swaying on the porch railing. 6 of them, red and gold, because Noah had been very specific about the colors this year. He was 7 now and had opinions. He had a lot of opinions, and Elena had spent every year of his life being quietly terrified by how much those opinions reminded her of someone she had trained herself never to think about. She had 12 minutes before the first guests arrived. She knew because she'd been checking the clock every 4 minutes since noon, the way she always did when she was anxious, counting down to some imaginary moment when everything would finally be okay. Instead, she was standing in her living room watching Damien Viscari walk up her front path. She moved before she thought about it, crossed the hallway, pulled open the front door, and planted herself in the doorway with her arms crossed and her feet exactly shoulder-width apart in a stance she'd learned from years of dealing with difficult family members in pediatric ICS. Steady, calm, don't let them see your pulse. Don't, she said. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Up close, he was different from what she'd spent 7 years remembering. Harder in some places, quieter in others. There were lines at the corners of his eyes she didn't recognize. His jaw was set in that particular way she did recognize, the one that meant he'd already decided something and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Elena. Don't say my name like that. She kept her voice low. The neighbors were still watching. Don't say anything. Get back in your car and drive away from my house. I can't do that. You absolutely can. You get in the car, you drive forward, you keep driving. I know about Noah. The words landed like a fist in the center of her chest. She didn't move. She'd gotten good at not moving. You need to leave, she said. He's 7 today. Damien looked down at the gift in his hands, then back up at her. March 15th. He weighs about 53 pounds, give or take, because he went through a phase last fall where he only ate peanut butter and apples, which apparently threw off the pediatrician's projections. He has your eyes. He has my... Stop. Her voice cracked on the word. She hated that. How long have you been watching us? Long enough to know he's safe. Long enough to know you've done something I couldn't have. He said it without resentment, which was worse than if he'd said it with anger. Anger she could fight. Whatever this was, measured, careful, tired, she didn't have a weapon for it. I'm not here to take anything from you. I need you to hear that. Then what are you here for? He looked at her for a long moment. To meet my son, and to explain what you saw 7 years ago, because it wasn't what you thought it was. Behind her, she heard Noah's footsteps on the stairs. The distinctive thump-thump slide of the last step that he'd been doing since he was 3, The one she'd told him 100 times not to do because he was going to hurt himself. The one she'd stopped telling him not to do because she'd realized she would miss it desperately when he stopped. "Mom?" His voice came through the screen door. "Are those cars for my party? Because Marcus's brother has a truck, but it's not that cool." Elena did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Damien, and she watched something happen in his face that she had not prepared herself for. He went very still. The gift dropped an inch in his hands, and then he caught it again. His jaw worked once. His eyes moved past her shoulder to the shape of his son standing behind the screen door, and for a single second, 1 second she would spend a long time trying to unsee, Damien Vescari looked like a man who had been running for 7 years and had just, for the first time, stopped. "Go back upstairs, baby," Elena said, keeping her voice even. "I'll be right in." "But who?" "Upstairs. I'll explain in a few minutes. Go." The footsteps retreated. She counted them. 7 steps up, then the creak of the hallway, then silence. She looked back at Damien. "You're not coming in." "I'm not asking to come in today." He held out the gift. "I'm asking you to let me explain. After that, you make whatever decision you need to make, and I'll respect it." "You'll respect it." She said it flat, no inflection. "I know what that sounds like coming from me. I know what you think I'm capable of. You've had 7 years to build a picture of me, and I imagine it's not a flattering one." "You were engaged, Damien." The words came out harder than she'd intended. "Good. They should. I saw the photos. I saw her ring. I watched you at that reception, your hand on her back, you laughing, you completely fine 3 months after you and I—" She stopped herself. "You were completely fine." "I was not fine. That's not what I saw." "I know." He stepped up 1 stair. She didn't step back, and he didn't come further. "Elena." Her name was Carla Marin. She was a federal agent embedded in my organization for 3 years. The engagement was staged. The whole thing was a coordinated operation to draw out a group of men inside my own ranks who were selling information to federal prosecutors and to 2 rival families at the same time. If anyone had known it wasn't real, if you had known, if anyone who knew you had known, it would have collapsed. People would have died. He paused. More people than did. She stared at him. "I never chose her over you," he said. "I never chose anything over you. I chose to protect the people in my organization who deserved protecting, and I did it the only way I knew how, and I didn't get to explain it to you first because there was no safe way to do that, and I was—" He stopped. Started again. "I was 29 years old, and I made a decision in about 48 hours that I have spent every day since wishing I had made differently. You could have told me. I couldn't. After. You could have told me after. After you were gone." His voice stayed level, but something in it shifted, like bedrock settling. "I looked for you, Elena. I want you to understand that clearly. I looked for you for 7 years. You are extraordinarily good at disappearing." She thought about the 4 different cities in the first 2 years. The name she'd legally changed before she'd changed it back because Noah deserved his real mother's name. The cash transactions, the careful digital absence, the job application she'd filled out in person with paper forms. She had been meticulous. She had been scared. She said, "If you'd found me earlier, I would have come exactly like this, with a badly wrapped gift and no plan except to stand on your porch and ask you to listen." Against every rational thought in her head, she looked at the gift. The ribbon was definitely crooked. The paper had been folded at the corners with a kind of desperate geometric hope. She hated that it got to her. "You can't come in today," she said. "Noah has friends coming. He doesn't know you exist. I'm not going to turn his birthday into whatever this would be." "I understand. I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm not saying you get to be in his life. I'm not saying any of that. I understand. I'm saying I'll talk to you. Not today. This week, maybe. On my terms." Something in his shoulders dropped very slightly, so slightly she might have imagined it. "On your terms. And you pull your cars back. All the way off this block. My neighbors already have their phones out." He turned and made a single gesture toward the lead vehicle. It was barely a movement, 2 fingers lifted, a slight tilt of the wrist. But all 4 SUVs pulled smoothly forward and around the corner and were gone from sight before she'd taken 2 full breaths. She hated that too. He set the gift on the bottom porch step. Happy birthday to him. Then he walked back to the remaining vehicle that had been idling out of sight down the block, got in, and it drove away. Elena stood in her doorway for a long moment, looking at the gift on the step with the crooked white ribbon. Then she picked it up and went inside. She stood at the kitchen counter for a while, not doing anything. The frosting knife was still on the counter. The cake was still half frosted. The clock said she had 9 minutes before the first car would pull up, and she needed to not look like a woman whose entire architecture had just shifted under her feet. She splashed cold water on her face, dried it, looked in the small mirror by the back door. 7 years, she thought. 7 years she'd been certain about what she'd seen. The photographs in the society pages, the glossy event coverage, Damien's hand at the small of another woman's back, while Elena had sat in a motel bathroom in Pennsylvania holding a positive pregnancy test and deciding what her life was now. She'd made that decision with the specific, sealed certainty of someone who had seen the evidence. She had been so sure. Now she was less sure. And being less sure, she was learning, felt a lot like the floor dropping out. She heard Noah thumping back down the stairs, proper footsteps this time, in a hurry. He appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing his blue birthday shirt and one sneaker, the other in his hand. Mom, who was that man? She turned to face him, 7 years old, small built but sturdy, with her cheekbones and something in the set of his eyes that she'd always told herself she was imagining. Someone from a long time ago, she said. Come here. Let me help with that shoe. He dropped into the chair she pulled out for him and shoved his foot toward her. She worked the laces with hands that only shook slightly. Is he coming to the party? Noah asked. No, baby. He left a present. I know. That was kind of nice. She tied off the bow, tugged it snug, looked up at her son's face for a moment in a way she didn't let herself do often, too direct and too long, cataloging him the way you catalog something you're afraid of losing. Yeah, she said. I guess it was. The doorbell rang. Noah shot out of the chair like a signal had been fired and ran for the front door, shouting the name of whoever he expected on the other side. Already forgetting about the man with the black cars and the badly wrapped gift, because he was 7 and the party was starting, and that was the whole universe. Elena stayed in the kitchen another 10 seconds. Then she heard a sound from the front of the house. Not a child's voice, not a doorbell. Something heavier. Something that made the hair at the back of her neck lift before her brain had processed what she was hearing. She moved into the hallway and stopped. Noah was standing at the open front door, very still, looking out at something on the porch. Mom, he said, in a voice she had never heard from him before. Quiet, careful. There are men outside. They have... I don't know what those are. She crossed the hallway in 4 steps and grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back hard. And in that same second, she saw them. 4 men on her porch and in her front yard, not dressed like party guests, moving with the particular focused economy of people who have done this before and know exactly how many seconds they have. Her phone was in her kitchen. Her front door was open. She had Noah's arm and about 3 seconds to make a decision. She made it. She pulled him back into the hallway, kicked the front door shut, and ran. The back door was still locked. She was already unlocking it, Noah's wrist in her hand, when she heard the front door come open behind them, not with a knock or a ring, but with the flat, definitive sound of something that doesn't wait for permission. She got them into the backyard. She was pulling Noah toward the fence when she heard something else. Engines. The same deep, expensive sound she'd heard earlier, coming fast down the alley behind the house. Black SUVs. 2 of them. The rear doors opened and men got out, but these ones were moving toward the men coming through her back door, not toward her. And there was shouting. And then a sound she registered as gunfire, but which her brain refused to fully accept because Noah was right there. And she had her hand over his ear, and she was trying to make herself as small a target as possible while also not being able to make herself small enough. A hand closed on her arm, and she turned, swinging, and connected with something, and then a voice said, Elena, it's Marcus. I'm with Damien. Get down. She didn't know a Marcus. She didn't care. She grabbed Noah and she got down. It was over in less than 90 seconds. She knew because she was counting. When she raised her head, 3 of the 4 men from her porch were on the ground, not moving. The fourth had run. The men from the SUVs were moving through her yard with the systematic efficiency of people running a drill, checking corners, speaking quietly into earpieces. And Damien was coming through her back gate. He wasn't wearing the charcoal jacket anymore. He'd dropped it somewhere. He had a radio in one hand and his eyes moved over her and Noah in one rapid sweep before something in his expression went tight, with a feeling she recognized, even after 7 years, as relief. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." She was still on the ground with her arms around Noah. "No, Noah, are you okay?" She turned to her son, running her hands over him, checking. Noah looked at the men in the yard, at the stillness where there had just been chaos, at the guns that were no longer raised but weren't holstered either. He looked at Damien. "Are you the guy who left the present?" he said. The silence held for a second too long. "Yeah," Damien said. "That was me." "My mom said you're from a long time ago." "I am." Noah considered this with the particular seriousness of a 7-year-old encountering information that doesn't quite fit any existing category. "Are you going to tell me what those things are that your guys have?" "Maybe later." "That's what my mom says when she means no." Damien looked at Elena. Elena looked at Damien. "You need to come with me," he said. "Both of you, right now. We can argue about it later, but right now you need to come with me because whoever sent those men knows where you live, and they will send more." She wanted to say no. Every instinct she had, every careful structure she had built around her life and her son's life was screaming at her to say no. But she looked at her son's face, and she looked at the men on the ground in her backyard, and she said, "Get his birthday cake. It's on the counter." One of the men by the gate blinked. "Ma'am? He doesn't get his party because of this." "Get the cake." A pause. Then, "Yes, ma'am." Damien was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read and wasn't sure she wanted to. She picked up her son and carried him toward the gate. 7 years old and 53 pounds and peanut butter and apples and one sneaker already untied again. She said without looking back, "This isn't me agreeing to anything." "I know," Damien said. She walked through the gate into the alley and toward the waiting cars and didn't look back at the house. She didn't let herself. The cake made it. Elena didn't know why that mattered as much as it did, but when the man she didn't know named Marcus set it carefully on the rear seat beside Noah's booster and clicked the door shut, something in her chest loosened by exactly 1 degree. 1 degree. That was all she could afford. The convoy moved fast through the coastal town's back roads, avoiding the main street, taking turns she wouldn't have thought to take, and Elena sat in the middle seat with Noah pressed against her left side, and the birthday cake balanced on his lap because he'd insisted, and she'd decided that was a battle she didn't have the reserves to fight right now. He held it with both hands, very seriously, like it was a task that had been assigned to him. "It's tilting," he said. "I see that." "If it tilts more, the frosting's going to touch the lid." "Then hold it level." He adjusted, frowned at the cake with the concentration of an engineer. "What's your name?" he said without looking up. A beat of silence from the front passenger seat. "Marcus," said the man who had grabbed Elena's arm in the backyard. "Marcus what?" "Reyes." "Okay." Noah seemed to file this. "Do you always drive this fast?" "Not always." "When do you drive slow?" "When things are okay." Noah looked out the window at the road blurring past. "So things aren't okay right now." Marcus said nothing. Elena pulled Noah closer, and he let her, which meant he was more scared than he was showing. He was his father's son in that particular way, and it hit her so precisely she had to look out her own window for a moment. Damien was in the lead vehicle. She couldn't see him. She could see the back of the first SUV, and that was it, which was already more Damien Viscari than she'd had in 7 years. And it was not enough, and also too much. The estate came into view 20 minutes later, set back from the coastal road behind a tree line so dense it functioned as a wall. Iron gates. Cameras at intervals she counted without meaning to. Gravel drive long enough that you couldn't see the house from the gate or the gate from the house, which she understood was a feature, not a design choice. The house itself was large without being showy about it. Stone and dark wood, 3 stories, lights on in the upper windows. A woman in her 50s was standing on the front steps when the convoy pulled in, arms crossed, watching them unload with the expression of someone who has seen convoys arrive in a hurry before and has developed specific feelings about it. "Who's that?" Noah asked. "I don't know." "She looks like she's going to tell someone off." "Probably." The woman waited until Elena had gotten out with Noah before she came down the steps. She looked at the boy for a long moment, and something moved across her face that she controlled quickly, the way experienced people controlled things. Not suppression, just management. "I'm Vera," she said. "I run the household. You must be hungry." Noah perked up immediately. "It's my birthday." "I heard." She looked at the cake still in his hands. "You carried that all the way here? It was tilting. Come inside, we'll find it a better surface." She looked at Elena. "You too. There's coffee. Real coffee, not the other kind." Elena didn't know what the other kind was, but she followed because Vera was already moving and Noah was already following Vera, and that was apparently how decisions got made now. Damien was inside. He was at a table in a room off the main hall that functioned as something between a kitchen and a command center. 2 laptops open, a man she didn't know standing at his shoulder, papers spread in a way that wasn't chaotic but wasn't organized either, the particular spread of someone in the middle of something that won't wait. He looked up when they came in. "Noah?" he said. Not to Elena, directly to the boy. "I'm glad you made it." Noah studied him. "Were those men trying to hurt us?" "Yes." Noah absorbed this. "Why?" "That's what I'm working on finding out." "Oh." He set the cake on the nearest flat surface that wasn't covered in papers. "Okay." Elena stared at her son's matter-of-fact nod and filed it away under the category of things she would deal with later, possibly when he was 30. She turned to Damien. "Tell me what just happened. Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. Tell me what happened at my house." He looked at the man at his shoulder. The man moved out of earshot, not out of the room, Elena noticed, but far enough. A line of courtesy, not privacy. 4 men, hired contractor level, not career, Damien said. Someone put them together fast, which means the order went out very recently. The question is when they found out Noah's location, because I only confirmed it 48 hours ago, and the number of people who knew is... He stopped. His jaw tightened. Small. How small? 3 people besides me. The silence had a specific weight to it. "So someone in your organization tried to kill my son," Elena said. "Someone with access to very specific information." "Yes." "And you want me to stay here? In your house? With people from your organization?" "I want you safe. And right now, this is the safest place I can put you, and I know how that sounds. Do you?" "Elena, don't." She moved closer, dropped her voice. Noah was across the room with Vera examining something in the refrigerator, but she'd spent 7 years developing the skill of arguing without performing. "Don't say my name like it's a period. Tell me why I should trust a single person in this building when one of 3 people you trusted just sent men to my son's birthday party." Damien looked at her. "Because," he said, "the 3 people are Marcus, Vera, and a man named Lucien Varga. And Lucien is my chief of operations and has been with me for 15 years. And I am standing here telling you that I cannot explain how those men found Noah so fast. And that is the thing keeping me awake right now, not your question." "What's Lucien's last known location?" He blinked, just once, but she caught it. "He was in the city, coordinating logistics for... Why?" "Because if I were running a leaked operation, I would make sure I wasn't anywhere near the fallout," Elena said. "Where is he now?" Damien turned to the man in the corner. "Find Lucien." The man moved. The next 3 hours were the most disorienting of Elena's life, which was saying something, because her life had included a lot of hours she didn't have a category for. Vera fed Noah birthday cake and 2 plates of pasta in that order, which he accepted as the correct birthday sequence. She found him a room on the 2nd floor with a window that looked out at the water and a bookshelf he immediately started cataloging. "He's 7, Vera said quietly, coming to stand beside Elena in the hallway outside the room. "Yes. He handles things well. He doesn't know what he's handling yet. Vera considered this. He's going to want answers. I know. What will you tell him? Elena looked at her son through the half-open door, running a finger along the spines of books he'd never read by a man he'd never met. In a house that was half fortress and half the kind of place someone builds when they're trying to make something feel like a home and don't quite know how. The truth, Elena said. When I know what it is. Vera nodded once and left. Elena stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back downstairs. The man Damien had sent to find Lucien came back with nothing good. Lucien had checked out of the city hotel he'd been booked in at 7 that morning, 3 hours before Elena's party, 2 hours before the convoy had left for the coast. His phone was going to voicemail. His second phone, the one only Damien's inner circle knew about, was off. 7 this morning, Elena said. Yes. Before you left to come see us. Damien's expression didn't change, which meant something was happening underneath it that he'd decided not to show. He knew I was going. I told him last night. You told him you were coming to see Noah. I told him I'd located you and I was going in person, not the exact address. He shouldn't have had the exact... He stopped. He's been running logistics for 6 months, routing, scheduling, location data. He would have had access to the tracking protocol we used to... Another stop, shorter this time, like he'd run into something. To find us, Elena finished. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She sat down, not because she wanted to, but because her legs had reached a decision without consulting her. She sat in the nearest chair and pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. You tracked us, she said. I've been looking for 7 years. That's not what I asked. I used every resource I had to find my son. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking you to understand why the idea of staying here, in your house, surrounded by the people who had access to our location before those men showed up. She stopped, started over. I need you to understand what you're asking me to trust. He pulled a chair from under the table and sat down across from her, not behind the table. He moved it so there was nothing between them, which she noticed. Lucien has been with me since I was 24, he said. He was the first person I trusted completely when I took over from my father. He built the operational structure that let me clean out the corrupt branches. He was, the person I would have said I owed more to than anyone in my organization. He paused. If it's him, Elena, if he's the one who leaked Noah's location, then I have been wrong about something fundamental for 15 years. And I need you to understand that that is not a comfortable thing to sit with. No, she said. I imagine it's not. I also need you to know that it doesn't change anything. Whoever did this, whatever the reason, nobody touches my son. The word landed in the room and stayed there. My son. Said without drama, without a claim being staked, just a fact as settled as stone. She looked at him. He doesn't know who you are yet. I know. You don't get to walk in and be his father because someone tried to... I know. Stop agreeing with me. I'm not agreeing. I'm saying I hear you. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I have been trying to find you for 7 years, Elena. Not to take anything, not to control anything. I know what my life is. I know what I've built and what that means and what it costs the people close to me. I'm not asking you to pretend it's something it isn't. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking you to let me keep you both alive until I can figure out who signed the kill order. After that, you can go wherever you want, and I'll fund the disappearance myself if that's what you need. But right now, I need you here. She held his gaze. 7 years was a long time to practice not looking at something. She was out of practice now. I found something, she said. Before everything fell apart. When I left New York. She stood up. Wait here. She went upstairs. Noah looked up from the bookshelf when she came in. Mom, did you know this guy has a whole shelf of books about ships? I didn't. Like not fun ships, actual historical ships. That's kind of weird, right? A little, she said, going to her bag. She'd packed it herself, fast, essential only, and she'd put it in without thinking because it had been in her go bag since the day she'd left New York. Some habits were too deep to be intentional anymore. She unzipped the inner pocket and took out the pendant. Dark metal, asymmetrical, roughly the size of a silver dollar, but heavier. Damien had given it to her 8 years ago in a hotel in Rome on the first trip they'd taken together, where neither of them had pretended it was something other than what it was. He'd said it had been his mother's. He'd said that about 3 possessions in his life, and she'd believed him about all 3, and she still believed him about the pendant. She'd taken it when she left because she'd been angry and because she'd wanted something of his, and she'd hated herself for both reasons. She turned it over in her hand. On the back, nearly flush with the surface, was a seam she'd never noticed before. Or maybe she'd noticed and assumed it was a casting flaw. 7 years of carrying a thing could make you stop seeing it. She pressed it. A section of the back panel shifted. She stood very still. Inside the hollow space in the pendant was something that did not belong in an 8-year-old piece of jewelry. A data chip, black, no larger than her thumbnail, with a biometric contact surface she recognized from the hospital's secure pharmaceutical storage system. Her fingerprint. The chip had been calibrated to her fingerprint. She went back downstairs. Damien was standing when she came in, phone to his ear, one hand pressed flat on the table. He held up a finger without looking at her, and said into the phone, "Then find him. Every resource. I don't care what it costs. I care what hour it is when you call me back." He hung up. He saw the pendant in her hand and went very still. "Where did you—" He stopped. "You kept it." "I kept it." She set it on the table between them. "Tell me what's inside it." The expression that crossed his face was not guilt. It was something older and more complicated. The expression of someone encountering an object they'd believed was lost and finding it changed the geometry of everything. He sat down slowly. "How did you find it?" "I pressed the back." "That panel requires a specific pressure point. It shouldn't have—" He stopped himself. "You found it by accident?" "I've been carrying it for 7 years." "Yes." He looked at the pendant. "It's a data chip, biometric, calibrated to my mother's fingerprint, or to whoever's print was registered at calibration." He looked up. "I registered it the day after I gave you that pendant. I didn't tell you because I thought—" He exhaled. "I thought if something ever happened to me, I wanted you to be able to access what's on it. There's financial data, records, transactions going back 15 years, names, amounts, the full operational financial history of my organization, including the people who were using it as a pipeline for corrupt money they couldn't launder through legitimate channels." The room felt very quiet. "Politicians," Elena said. "Some. Rival crime families." "Several." "How many people know this chip exists?" He didn't answer immediately. "Damien, how many people know?" "2," he said. "My lawyer, who is sealed by privilege and has been for years. And Lucien." A pause with a sharp edge to it. "I told Lucien about the chip 2 years ago. I didn't tell him what was on it. I told him it existed and that if anything happened to me, he should find a way to get it to you, because you were the only person I'd registered it to." The silence that followed was not comfortable. "So Lucien knew the chip existed," Elena said slowly. "He knew it was calibrated to me. He knew that meant I had access to 15 years of financial records that could destroy everyone on that list, yes. And he's been trying to find me. He's been—" Damien stopped. She watched the realization move across his face, not fast, not dramatic, but with the particular heaviness of something that has been true for a while and is only now being recognized as such. "He's been helping me look for you," he said. "He ran most of the search operation. He controlled what information came in and what I was told." The sound that came out of Elena was not quite a laugh. "He's been in charge of your search for me," she said. "Yes." "So he could find us whenever he chose?" "Yes." "And he waited until you were with us?" He said nothing. "He waited until you confirmed the location and went in person," she said. "Because he needed both of us in the same place. He needed you away from your security structure, and he needed me to lead him to the chip." She watched Damien's expression move through something she didn't have a name for. Not anger, not yet. Something below anger, The thing that exists before anger, when you realize the architecture of your trust has been a door someone else has been walking through for years. I need to see what's on that chip, he said. I know. Do you know what print it's calibrated to? She looked at the chip on the table, at the biometric surface, at the small flat panel that had been flush against her palm for 7 years without her knowing it was anything other than metal. She picked it up and pressed her right thumb to the contact surface. Nothing happened for a second. Then a light, small, blue, low, pulsed once from inside the pendant. Damien's laptop chimed. He turned to it. She came around the table to look over his shoulder at what was loading, and it was loading fast, not a trickle but a flood, directories and files and financial records cascading into view, names and figures and transaction chains that meant nothing to her but clearly meant everything to him, because she heard the quality of his silence change the way a room's atmosphere changes before weather. How much? She said. Enough, he said, to end everyone on this list. She looked at the names. Some she recognized from news coverage, one she recognized from the hospital fundraiser circuit, a tech businessman who'd donated to the pediatric wing and given a speech about children being the future. She was still looking at the screen when Marcus appeared in the doorway. His face was the specific face of someone who has news they've decided there is no good way to deliver. Sir, he said. Tell me, Damien said without turning. We found the kill order, the one that went to the contractors this morning. Marcus paused. It was signed with your encrypted seal, sir. Your operational seal. The one only you and Lucien have authorization codes for. The room held its breath. Damien turned from the laptop slowly. Say that again. The order that sent 4 men to the boy's birthday party was authenticated with your own seal. Elena took a step back from the table. Not away from Damien. She didn't think it was fear, not exactly, but a step that gave her room to think without being inside his radius. She looked at him. He was looking at Marcus. His jaw was set in the particular way she'd seen on the porch that afternoon, decided, locked, but underneath it something had shifted from earlier. What had been determination was now something colder. He used my seal, Damien said. Yes, sir. Which means whoever finds that order, federal investigators, rival families, anyone, the order has my signature on it. Yes. He didn't just try to kill my son. His voice was very level, very even, the evenness of something under enormous controlled pressure. He tried to make it look like I did it. Elena looked at the chip still in her hand, at the files still cascading on the screen, at the name Lucien Varga, which did not appear in the files she could see, but which she understood now was the space around every name that did, the absence that had been operating the whole machine. He's been planning this for a long time, she said. Damien looked at her. Not just today, she said. The disappearance. 7 years ago. You said earlier he ran the search operation. He controlled what information reached you. She set the chip down carefully. What if he didn't just fail to find me? What if he found me early and kept it from you and spent 7 years positioning himself so that when you finally did find Noah, he could use it? Damien's expression. She'd never had a word for it before. She had one now, the particular look of a man who has just understood how long he has been in a room he thought he chose. He would need the chip, Damien said. He needed you to lead him to me, to lead him to it. He's been waiting. He's been building, she said. The sealed operation, the fake engagement, the years of running your search. He's had access to everything. He's been inside your house for 15 years, Damien, not as your advisor, as your successor. The word hung in the room. Marcus was already at his phone. Damien turned back to the laptop and began moving through files fast, looking for something specific, and Elena watched his hands and the set of his shoulders and understood that they had crossed some line in the last 4 minutes that could not be uncrossed. Then Marcus said quietly from the doorway, Sir, he's here. Damien stopped moving. Lucien's at the gate, Marcus said. He's asking to come in. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. Outside, the harbor lights were a thin line through the dark. Upstairs, Noah was sleeping in a room full of someone else's books, And somewhere in the house, a birthday cake with one slice missing was sitting on a counter, and the data chip with 15 years of evidence was on the table between them, and Lucien Varga was at the gate asking to be let inside. Damien looked at Elena. She looked at the chip. "Let him in," she said. Damien said, Let him in," before Elena could second-guess what she'd just told him to do. Marcus spoke into his earpiece. 8 seconds of silence. Then the distant sound of the iron gate moving on its track, the low mechanical groan of it, and Elena stood in the kitchen with her hand flat on the table next to the data chip and tried to remember how to breathe at a normal rate. "We need a plan," she said. "I have one." "Tell me." "He doesn't know you found the chip." Damien turned from the window. "He doesn't know we pulled the kill order. He came here because he wants to know what we know, and he's going to perform concern and offer to help, and I'm going to let him. And then? And then I'm going to watch his face when I tell him we have the chip." Elena looked at him. "That's not a plan. That's a trap with no walls. The walls are the files loading on that laptop." He glanced at the screen where the data cascade had slowed to a stream. Every transaction, every name, 15 years of documentation. He cannot afford for any of that to become public, which means he cannot afford to do anything to me or to you until he has the chip physically in his hand, which means right now in this room we have something he wants more than he wants us dead. He paused. "That's leverage. That's the walls." Elena said nothing for a moment. Then, "He's going to lie. Extremely well. He's had 15 years of practice in front of me. And you want me in the room. I want you exactly where you are standing right now." His eyes moved to the chip on the table. "Put it somewhere. Not on your body, not obvious. Somewhere in this room you can reach without it looking like you're reaching." She picked it up, looked around. The dish rack by the sink had a row of mugs hanging underneath it. She walked over and hooked the pendant's chain over the rearmost hook, behind a heavy ceramic mug, so it hung there invisible unless you were looking from exactly the right angle. She came back to the table. "Don't look at it again," Damien said. "I know." The front door opened. She heard Lucien Varga before she saw him, a measured, unhurried step in the hall, the sound of someone who does not enter places quickly because he has never needed to. He knocked once on the open kitchen door and came in. He was smaller than she'd expected, which was the first surprise. Her brain had built him large over the last hour, broad-shouldered, physically dominant, the way you imagine a man who has been running a criminal empire from behind someone else's desk. But Lucien Varga was slim, middle-aged, with a narrow face and pale eyes, and the kind of unremarkable appearance that disappeared in a crowd. He wore a gray wool jacket over a dark shirt, no tie. He looked like an accountant who exercised. He looked at Damien first. "I heard about the coast," he said. "I came as soon as Marcus reached me." "Where were you?" Damien said. "Driving. I had a meeting in Bridgeport that ran long. My phone died on the road. I didn't get Marcus's call until I'd charged it at a gas station." He held up the phone as if the screen would confirm the story. "4 contractors. I ran the faces through our network. They came out of a pool we haven't used in 3 years, which means someone reached back into old operational contacts to build a team." He was good. Elena understood in that first 90 seconds exactly how good he was, because the information was real. The contractor pool detail was too specific to be invented in a car on the way here, and the performance of urgency was pitched perfectly just below theatrical. He looked like a man who'd driven fast to get to his employer. He looked like exactly what he'd spent 15 years making himself look like. Then his eyes moved to her. "You must be Elena," he said, and smiled. And the smile was warm and entirely calibrated. "I've heard about you for years." Damien never stopped. "I know who you are," Elena said, a half-beat. "Of course. He's told you about me." "He has." Lucien looked between them, read the room. Something shifted in his expression, very subtle, the way a card player's face shifts when the table doesn't respond the way the odds said it should. "Is there something—" "Sit down, Lucien," Damien said. He sat, slowly, without showing that it was slowly. He pulled a chair from under the table and settled into it the way a man settles when he is choosing to appear relaxed rather than actually being relaxed. Tell me about the seal, Damien said. Lucien's eyes did not move. Which seal? The kill order. The one that went to the contractors at 8 this morning. My operational seal is on it. A pause that lasted exactly the right number of seconds, long enough to suggest processing, short enough to not suggest calculation. That's not possible. Marcus pulled the authentication record. Then the authentication was forged. Someone spoofed the... Lucien. Damien's voice didn't rise. It did the opposite, went quieter, and Elena felt the temperature in the room change. The seal requires a 12-character rotating code that generates on a 48-hour cycle. 2 people have the generation algorithm, me and you. There's no spoofing it. Silence. Lucien looked at the table. Then he looked up, and the thing Elena saw happen in his face was not quite what she'd expected. It wasn't the collapse of a mask. It was more precise than that, more deliberate. It was the decision to drop one mask and show a different one underneath. The warm urgency went away, and what replaced it was something quieter and much older. "How long have you known?" he said. Damien said nothing. "The chip," Lucien said. "She found the chip." Elena kept her face still. "I've been looking for it for 3 years," Lucien said, conversationally, as if this were a post-mortem on a project and not a confession. "I knew you'd registered it biometrically. I knew the print wasn't yours. You don't use your own biometrics on anything sensitive. You never have. Your father taught you that. I just couldn't find who you'd used." He looked at Elena. "I didn't know it was her until 6 months ago, when I ran a cross-reference on the registration date against every personal contact you'd logged in that period." 6 months, Damien said. 6 months I've been trying to find her quietly, without you knowing I was looking. But you were already looking. You'd never stopped looking. Something that might have been genuine in another context moved across his face. "You're very stubborn, Damien. It's one of your worst qualities." "Where's the order coming from, Lucien?" "I don't know what you pull." "Not the contractors. The order behind the order. Someone told you to move this week. You waited 6 months with the information. You waited until I confirmed the location and went personally. Something changed." Damien leaned forward. "What changed?" Lucien looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his own hands on the table, and Elena watched him make a decision she couldn't read the edges of yet. "Sit down," Lucien said, not to Damien, to Elena. "You should hear this too, given what it cost you." She didn't sit. "Say it standing." A flicker of something that wasn't quite respect crossed his face. 7 years ago, he said, when you left New York, I found you in Pennsylvania. 11 days after you disappeared." The words hit her in the sternum. "You were in a motel, Clearfield County. You'd paid cash, given a false name, but you used a credit card for the gas station across the road, and the system flagged it as associated with a vehicle registered in your old neighborhood." He said it neutrally, like a map being read aloud. "I had your location in 11 days. Elena's hands had gone very still at her sides. "I didn't tell Damien," Lucien said. The room held. "Why?" Damien said it as one flat syllable. Lucien turned to look at him. "Because you were about to do something catastrophically stupid. You were 3 months into the Carla Marine operation. The federal case was built on your continued participation in the staged engagement. If you'd broken away to find a woman who had disappeared voluntarily, it would have signaled the whole thing. The prosecution would have collapsed. 3 years of work, 6 informants, all of it gone. The corrupt men inside your organization would have had time to destroy the evidence and disappear." "So you protected the operation," Damien said. "I protected everything you'd built." "Yes." "By letting me believe she was gone. By giving the operation time to close. I planned to tell you after, when Carla Marine's testimony was on record and the sealed indictments were filed. 6 months, that's all I needed." "And then?" Elena said. Lucien looked at her. "And then I found out you were pregnant." The silence was absolute. "One of my people in Clearfield saw you at a pharmacy," he said. "The purchase was apparent. And I understood that if Damien found out, nothing would stop him from pulling out of the operation immediately. So I made a calculation." "You made a calculation," Elena said. "I let 6 months become 7 years," he said. "I understand that's not a number I can justify. I'm not trying to. I'm telling you the sequence." She looked at him and understood something that her rational mind had known for the last hour, and her body was only now catching up to, that the entire architecture of the last 7 years, the motel in Pennsylvania, the 4 cities, the careful disappearance, the single parenthood, Noah's whole life, had been built on a foundation that this man had poured, not with malice, at the beginning, with a cost-benefit calculation that had put her child in the column labeled acceptable loss. "You forged Damien's messages," she said. He didn't deny it. "Yes. The ones I received in the first month after I left, the ones that confirmed he'd moved on. You needed to stay gone. A clean break was cleaner. I was pregnant," she said, "and you sent me messages in his name telling me I'd been—" She stopped. She would not do this in front of him. She would not let him see what those months had been. "So the beginning was the operation," she said. "What about the 7 years after? What changed? What made you move this week?" Lucian looked at the table again, and Elena understood then that they'd reached the part of the story she hadn't anticipated, because his expression changed in a way that the earlier confession hadn't changed it. Something tightened, something he hadn't prepared for. "There's a buyer," Damien said quietly. Lucian looked up. "Someone offered to purchase the data on that chip," Damien said. "Someone who knew it existed and knew roughly what was on it. Someone who had reason to believe they could get it from you." The silence confirmed it. "Who?" Damien said. "The Senna family," Lucian said. "They've been rebuilding since you dismantled their East Coast operation 4 years ago. They got word, I don't know how, that there was documentation that could be used to turn the political and business figures on your list into weapons against you, against your legitimization efforts, against the foundations and the legal restructure you've been planning." He paused. "They offered me the kind of money that doesn't have a real number." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I'd think about it." He met Damien's eyes. "I've been thinking about it for 6 months. Damien stood up from his chair, slowly, the way a building settles before something structural fails. "You've been sitting across from me for 6 months, he said, "planning to sell 15 years of documentation to the family I destroyed, using my own seal to frame the kill order so that when it was over, the evidence pointed at me." "That was a contingency plan," Lucien said. "If things went wrong." "They went wrong in my son's backyard. The contractors moved early. I gave them a window. He stopped. He'd made a mistake in the syntax, and they all heard it, and nobody pretended they hadn't. He'd said I gave them a window. The room went very cold. "Marcus," Damien said without raising his voice. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Take him to the East Room," Damien said. Lucien stood. He did it calmly, which was the most frightening thing he'd done since he walked in. He stood and straightened his jacket and looked at Elena with an expression that was not quite an apology, and not quite anything else she had a name for. "I did protect the operation," he said. "That part was true. Everything after that—" He stopped. "I understand there's nothing useful I can say." "No," Elena said. "There isn't." Marcus took his arm. They left. Elena stood in the kitchen, listening to the footsteps recede down the hall, and counted them the way she counted everything now, as if numbers could make a container for what didn't fit any other shape. Then she went to the dish rack and unhooked the pendant and held it in her hand and felt its weight, which was the same as it had always been, the same weight she'd carried for 7 years, the same metal against the same palm, but it was different now in a way she couldn't explain and didn't try to. Damien was at the window. He'd been at the window for 30 seconds and hadn't moved. "The Senna family," she said. "Yes." "They know about Noah." He turned. "Yes." Lucien told them. "As leverage, yes. If he couldn't get the chip, he could offer the heir." The word hit her like ice water. Heir, Noah. Her son's life itemized as a bargaining chip in a transaction she'd never agreed to enter. "How much time do we have?" she said, "before they realize the contractors failed and send something worse?" He picked up his phone. "Hours, maybe less. The file's on the laptop. Uploading to a secure server. The chip data will be preserved off-site in 20 minutes regardless of what happens to the physical chip. Then we need to move Noah." "I know." "And Lucien stays here." His voice was flat. "Secured. He knows where you'd move us. He knows your locations. He knows the ones I've used before, not the one I'm thinking of. She looked at him. Where? My father's property in the Catskills. Lucien never had access to the full deed. It transferred through a holding company in my mother's name. He held her gaze. Nobody knows about it except me. And now you. She absorbed this. You're trusting me with the one location he doesn't know. I'm trusting you with my son's life, he said, which is what you've been doing alone for 7 years. I figured you'd earn the reciprocal. She didn't have an answer for that, so she didn't try to manufacture one. I'm waking Noah, she said. Give me 10 minutes to arrange transport. Different vehicles, different route than we came. She was already moving toward the stairs. Noah was asleep on top of the covers with his shoes still on, one arm flung out toward the bookshelf as if even in sleep he was cataloging, and Elena stood in the doorway for a moment looking at him with the particular fullness of a parent looking at a sleeping child and knowing the world is closer than the child knows. She crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed. Noah. She put her hand on his shoulder. Hey, wake up. He surfaced slowly, the way he always did. Not groggy, but careful, like he was checking the information available before committing to consciousness. He looked at her, looked at the room, remembered where he was. Are we leaving again? He said. Yes. Because of the men from before? Yes. He sat up. Is the man... He paused. The one with the cars. Is he coming with us? Yes. He thought about this with the same seriousness he'd applied to the tilting cake. Is he going to keep us safe? She looked at her son. At the face she had spent 7 years tracking for resemblances she told herself she wasn't looking for. He's going to try, she said. Okay. He reached for his other shoe. Did anyone bring the cake? She almost laughed. Yes, someone brought the cake. Good. I didn't have enough. They were down the stairs and into the rear courtyard with 2 bags between them when Vera appeared from the side entrance with a coat for Noah and a travel bag Elena hadn't asked for, but immediately understood contained the things a woman of Vera's particular experience knew you needed when you left fast in the middle of the night. The cake is in a cooler in the 3rd vehicle, Vera said. Thank you, Elena said. Don't thank me. Be fast. Damien was in the courtyard. He'd changed his jacket and had a different phone in his hand. He looked at Noah when they came out, and Noah looked back at him with the directness that Elena had spent 7 years attributing to some personality quirk, and was only now understanding was simply his inheritance. Are you good at keeping secrets? Noah said to Damien. Damien said, What kind of secrets? The kind where you don't tell anyone where we're going. That's actually my specialty. Noah considered this with appropriate skepticism. Okay, he said. Then I guess that's good. They were pulling out of the courtyard when Elena's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at Damien. Don't answer it, he said. It buzzed again, stopped. Then a text came through. A photograph. She looked at it. It was a photograph of the east room of the estate, taken from outside the window. Lucien sitting in the chair where Marcus had left him, wrists zip-tied, expression unreadable. The text beneath the photograph said, We already have someone inside. She showed it to Damien. He looked at it, his jaw set. He spoke to Marcus in the front seat in 2 words. Sweep the building. We're already gone, Elena said. Marcus needs to stay with us. I have people at the estate. Your people at the estate are whoever took that photograph. She held the phone so he could see it again. Lucien told you nobody else knew about the chip, but the Senna family knew, which means the information chain didn't start with Lucien. She watched the thought move across his face and pressed it before he could redirect. You have a second leak, someone else, someone who isn't Lucien. He looked at the photograph. Who else had access to your seal, she said. Nobody. Only... He stopped. Damien. It's not possible. You said that about Lucien an hour ago. The vehicle was moving. The gate was behind them. The road was dark and the Catskills were 2 hours away, and somewhere in the estate they'd just left, a man in a chair was the most visible piece of a problem that was now clearly much larger than one man in a chair. She looked at the photograph again. At the window. at the angle. The photo was taken from outside, she said, which means whoever is inside was already there when you pulled in tonight, before Lucy arrived, before the convoy came back from the coast. She turned to Damien. They were inside before we arrived. Damien pulled out his phone, called someone. Let it ring. Pick up, he said quietly. Let it ring more. Pick up. Nobody picked up. He lowered the phone. The name on the screen was a single word, the name of his estate's head of internal security, a position that sat above Marcus, that sat above everyone, that had access to every room and every system and every camera in the building. Who is that? Elena said. My cousin, Damien said. Petro. The convoy kept moving. The road unspooled dark ahead of them, and Noah was asleep again between them, with his head against Elena's shoulder, and the chip was in her coat pocket, and the text was on her phone screen, and the name on Damien's phone screen glowed once before the screen went dark. Elena said, How long has Petro worked for you? 12 years. And Lucian recruited him? Damien looked out the window at the dark. Lucian recommended him, he said, when I needed to fill the position. She let that sit. So Lucian built the access, she said. He put Lucian's man in the position. He built the leak before he needed it. Years before. She paused. He didn't improvise any of this, Damien. The Senna money, the seal, your cousin, the search operation he ran for 7 years. This is architecture. He was building a transfer of power while standing in your house, pretending to hold it up. Outside, the first trees of the highway corridor began to move past the window. They were in the open now, exposed, on a road Lucian knew because there were only 3 routes from the coast to the interior, and a 15-year operational mind would have mapped all of them. We need to go a different way, she said. There is no different way? Then we need to go faster, Damien told the driver. The vehicle accelerated. Elena put her hand in her coat pocket and closed her fingers around the chip, and felt its weight and thought about the fact that somewhere in the data cascade that had poured onto Damien's laptop, Petro Viscari's name was almost certainly listed in a transaction she now understood had been a retainer, a payment for access, an investment in a future that Lucian had been building 1 brick at a time for 12 years. She thought about Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. 11 days. He'd found her in 11 days. And he'd sat on it for 7 years, managing the information, building towards something she hadn't understood until tonight, and tonight might be too late to understand it in a way that mattered. Her phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. This time it wasn't a photograph. It was an audio file. She looked at Damien. He looked at the phone. She pressed play. Noah's voice came out of the speaker. Not present tense Noah. This was younger, maybe 5, maybe 5.5. The voice he'd had before it had begun to lose the early childhood softness. Recorded. She recognized the background sounds. Their kitchen in the second apartment, the one near the water treatment facility, the one she'd thought was completely private. He was singing. A song she'd taught him. Something small and private and entirely theirs. And then the audio file ended and was replaced by a single line of text. We know everywhere you've ever been. Give us the chip or we introduce ourselves to the boy. Elena stopped breathing. Damien took the phone from her hand, read the message, set the phone face down on his knee with a careful, deliberate movement that she recognized as the physical act of not doing what he wanted to do. They've had surveillance on you, he said. For how long? Years, she said. If Lucian found me in 11 days and sat on it, he would have needed to verify I stayed gone. He would have needed... She stopped. The walls of the last 7 years were rearranging themselves, every safe apartment and careful routine and presumed privacy stacking into a new shape that looked nothing like safety and everything like a managed containment. He was watching us, the whole time, to make sure I didn't come back on my own. And Petro had the resources to maintain that surveillance without it touching my operational budget, Damien said. External contractors, off book. So they have recordings, possibly years of them. And they'll use Noah to... They won't touch him, Damien said. Damien, I said they won't touch him. He turned to look at her, and whatever was in his face was not a guarantee exactly, but it was something she'd only seen once before. Rome. 8 years ago. when he'd said something with his whole body and not just his voice. They cannot use him if they don't have him, and they do not have him. She looked at her son asleep between them, head still against her shoulder, breathing the slow and trustworthy breath of someone who had no information about what his life was actually being made of right now. "He's going to need to know," she said. "Yes." "Everything." "Yes." "He's 7. "I know." His voice was quieter than she'd heard it all night. "I know that. I'm sorry that's the conversation you have to have." "We," she said. He looked at her. "We have that conversation," she said. "If you're going to be his father, then you're going to be in the room when his mother tells him the truth about his life. You don't get to hand me that and step back." He held her gaze for a moment. "Okay," he said. The vehicle moved through the dark. The trees thickened on either side of the road. 2 hours to the Catskills, and somewhere behind them an estate with a compromised security head, and a man in a chair, and a window where a photograph had been taken, and ahead of them a property only Damien's mother had known about, and in Elena's coat pocket a chip that had started this whole unwinding and was now the only thing keeping them from the full weight of what Lucien Varga had built. She felt the vehicle begin to slow. She looked up. The driver said quietly, "Sir, there's something on the road." Ahead, in the sweep of the headlights, a car was stopped diagonally across both lanes, not broken down, deliberately placed. Lights off. Damien was already on the radio. The second vehicle in the convoy responded. "We have movement in the tree line, left side, multiple contacts." The third vehicle, same right side. "Suggest we reverse," and a sound. The road ahead of them erupted in light as a vehicle that had been dark and still suddenly turned on its high beams directly into the convoy's windshield. Elena put her arm across Noah before she'd made a decision to do it. He woke up blinking. "Mom?" She said, "Stay down," and pulled him flat across the seat. Damien said 2 words to Marcus in the front seat, and Marcus was already moving and the vehicle was already going in reverse. But the trees on both sides were giving up the shapes of men who had been waiting there in the dark, with the patience of people who knew exactly which road this convoy would take because they had been told, and they had been ready, and the trap had been built long before tonight. The first gunshot hit the lead vehicle's rear panel. Noah said very quietly into Elena's ribs, "I thought he was good at keeping secrets." And Elena, with her arm around her son on the floor of an armored vehicle on a dark highway with the tree line closing in on both sides, thought, "So did I." The vehicle was moving backward at a speed that wasn't designed for reverse. Elena kept her arm across Noah and her other hand braced against the seat back and felt the whole chassis shudder every time the driver corrected the wheel, the tires screaming against asphalt that didn't care what direction they needed to go. Noah had his face pressed against her ribs and wasn't making a sound, which was either bravery or shock, and she didn't have time to determine which. "Second vehicle is cut off," Marcus said from the front, voice flat and operational. "They've got a truck across the rearward lane." "How many in the tree line?" Damien said. 8, maybe 10. I lost visual when the lights went." "Side road, half a mile back. Get to it." "If they've got it covered." "Get to it, Marcus." The driver wrenched the wheel. The SUV slid wide across both lanes, rear end swinging with the particular violence of a large vehicle asked to move like a small one, and then they were facing the opposite direction and accelerating forward, and Noah made a single involuntary sound against Elena's side that she absorbed without comment, because she was making her own involuntary sounds internally, and managing them was taking all available resources. A gunshot. Then 2 more in quick succession, not the flat pop of a handgun, but something heavier, caliber, that meant business. The rear window held. She didn't know what the glass was rated for, and was grateful she didn't have time to find out. "They're behind us," Marcus said. "I know." Damien was on his phone. "Where's the third vehicle?" Static. Then a voice she didn't recognize. "Still at the blockade. We can't—" More static. "Minimum 4 vehicles on our position. Sir, we cannot—" The call dropped. Damien looked at the phone, put it in his jacket pocket. "The third vehicle had 2 of my best men," he said. Not to Marcus, not to Elena exactly. The statement of a man accounting to himself. Are they? Elena started. I don't know. He looked at her. The side road leads to an old service route. It connects to the highway bypass 3 miles east. We can lose pursuit in the interchange if Marcus is fast enough. I'm fast enough, Marcus said, with the particular offense of someone who has never needed to claim competence because it has always been evident. They hit the side road doing 60, and the surface changed from asphalt to packed gravel, and the SUV's suspension expressed its opinion loudly. Elena tightened her arm around Noah, and Noah tightened himself against her, and neither of them said anything because the math of the situation didn't leave room for conversation. She could see in the right side mirror headlights on the main road. Turning, following. 2 vehicles behind us, she said. 3, Marcus corrected. The third one cut through the field. See the lights at 2 o'clock. She looked. 3 sets of headlights spread wide, closing the gap with the coordinated movement of people who had rehearsed this or something close enough to it. How far to the interchange? She said. 2 miles, Damien said. 90 seconds at this speed. They'll be on us in 60. I know. Damien, I know, Elena. Noah lifted his head from her ribs. His face in the dark was very still. I can hear your heart, he told her. It's really loud. I know, baby. Mine too. He considered this. Is that bad? No, she said. That's just what it does when it's working hard. He looked past her at the side window in the darkness rushing past. Are we going to make it to the road? Yes, she said, with the certainty she manufactured on the spot and delivered without hesitation, because that was what you did. Marcus hit the interchange ramp without slowing. The SUV lifted on the left wheels for 1 stomach-dropping second before gravity resolved its opinion and they came down hard and accelerating onto the bypass. Elena heard the first pursuing vehicle hit the ramp behind them, closer than she wanted to calculate. Take the merge, Damien said, into highway traffic. There's a truck depot 2 exits east. We lose the vehicles there. Take the merge. Marcus took the merge. Highway traffic at 11:15 on a Tuesday was light but not empty, and the SUV threaded between a semi and a panel van with the geometry of a man who was indeed fast enough and knew it, and Elena stopped watching the mirror because the mirror was not helping. Chip, Damien said. She looked at him. If this goes wrong, he said, the chip gets to the server. The upload isn't finished. I know. I need you to be the one who... I know, she said. Don't finish that sentence in front of him. He looked at Noah, looked back at her, nodded once. They rode in silence for 90 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then Marcus said depot and took an exit, and the highway fell away behind them, and they were in a landscape of parked trucks and loading bays and the particular sodium orange light of industrial facilities that never fully close. He killed the SUV's lights, drove slow, navigating by the facility's ambient glow, threading between rows of parked semis until they were deep enough in that the sightlines from the road were blocked in every direction. He stopped the engine. Silence, except for the ticking of cooling metal. Elena realized she'd been holding the same breath for approximately 2 minutes. She let it out. They'll scan the exits, Damien said quietly. They had the road mapped, which means they have local surveillance. We have maybe 6 minutes before someone thinks to check the depot. The upload, Elena said. He pulled out his phone, checked it. 62%. How long for the rest? At current speed, 14 minutes. She did the math. We don't have 14 minutes. No, she thought. The depot has a network. Facilities this size run secure commercial infrastructure. Broadband, not cellular. If we can access it, we can finish the upload in half the time. He looked at her. Can you do that? I spent 3 years as a charge nurse managing hospital data systems because administration kept cutting the IT budget. She held out her hand. Give me the phone and your laptop. He handed her both without a further question, which she catalogued as either trust or desperation and decided was probably both. The laptop was already open. The upload dashboard was running. She looked at the network settings, found 3 commercial SSIDs in range, tried the first 2 and got authentication walls, tried the third and got a guest portal designed for truckers' logging hours, which meant low security and manageable bandwidth restrictions if you knew which header to spoof. She knew which header to spoof because the pharmaceutical supply chain ran the same network architecture, and she'd had to work around it twice when the hospital's controlled substance records had needed emergency offsite backup during a ransomware event in 2021. 71%, she said. It's moving. Damien was watching the mirrors. Noah had crawled onto the rear bench and was looking at the rows of parked trucks through the back window with the absorbed attention of someone who has processed the adrenaline and come out the other side into a kind of watchful calm. There are a lot of trucks, he said. Yes, Marcus said, like a really lot. Noah, Elena said, I'm just saying. 4 minutes passed. The upload climbed, 81, 87. Then Noah said, There's a car. Elena looked up. At the far end of the row, moving slow with its lights off, a dark sedan was navigating between the trucks with exactly the same careful logic they'd used. Someone had thought to check the depot after all. How many? Damien said. 1 car, Noah said. I can only see 1. 1 is a scout, Marcus said. Others are at the exits. Upload, Elena said. 93. How long? 90 seconds. We don't have 90 seconds if that scout calls our position in. Damien looked at Marcus. Something passed between them that was a conversation without being one. Don't, Elena said. It's 1 vehicle, Marcus said. You step out of this car. They know exactly where we are. They know anyway when the scout runs our plates. 94, Elena said. Give me 60 seconds. Marcus looked at Damien. Damien looked at the scout vehicle, which had stopped 2 rows over. The driver's door was opening. 60 seconds, Damien said. Marcus stayed in the car. His hand was on the door handle. He stayed. The scout was on foot now, moving between the trucks with a flashlight, angling toward them with the systematic patience of someone covering a grid. He was 30 yards out, 25. 97, Elena said. 20 yards. 98. The flashlight swept across the front of their SUV and kept moving, and Elena understood he hadn't seen them yet. The angle was wrong. The truck beside them was throwing a shadow. He stopped, turned back. The flashlight came direct. Done, Elena said. 100%. It's done. The flashlight hit the windshield. Marcus was out of the car before the scout could key his radio. The sequence that followed lasted approximately 8 seconds, and Elena pulled Noah against her and turned his face into her shoulder and kept it there until Marcus was back in the driver's seat breathing harder than before. Go, Damien said. Marcus started the engine. They moved. The scout's radio was in Marcus's hand. It was chattering, other voices, other positions, a net of pursuit that was tightening around a location they were already leaving. They think we're still in the north section, Marcus said. Scout reported in before... He paused. Before he couldn't. Elena kept her hand on Noah's back, felt him breathing, counted the breaths. The upload is done, she said. The files are off-site. Damien looked at her. In the dim light of the depot, his face was all shadow and hard angles, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running their own engine on pure intention for about 18 hours. Which means, she said, we don't need the chip anymore. Not for the data. Correct. Well, which also means we have something they want that we no longer need. He understood her immediately. You want to use it as bait. I want to end this tonight, she said. We can't run forever. We can't put him in a car and keep driving and hope the net doesn't close. We know where Lucien is. We know he's the one the Senna family is operating through. If we give them a location, if we offer the chip through a channel they trust, they'll come to us. On ground we choose. That's... He stopped. Elena, that's an ambush. You're describing setting an ambush. I'm describing ending this before your son has to spend another night on the floor of a moving vehicle. He looked at Noah. Noah, head still against Elena's shoulder, had the specific half-awake quality of a child who is listening to everything but has decided not to announce it. Where? Damien said. You know somewhere? He thought for 3 seconds. The shipyard, he said. Old Sanaa facility. They took it in the divorce when I dismantled their operation 4 years ago. They'll have people there. It's operational again, which is how they funded the rebuild. They know the layout. They think that's an advantage. And? I know it better. Something shifted in his expression. I built the security infrastructure there 12 years ago, before the Senas took it in a deal. I know every access point, every structural weakness. Structural weakness, she said. The crane system. Old cargo crane on Pier 7, northern end. The counterweight mechanism was upgraded, but the primary mounting was never... He stopped. It doesn't matter. What matters is I know it, and they don't know I know it. And Lucien? Lucien is still at the estate, secured. You said secured. Marcus's men. Your cousin's men are also at the estate, she said. The pause was very short. He picked up his radio. The call to the estate went through. A voice she didn't know answered. Damien asked for verification, a specific code word, something operational. The voice gave a code word back. Damien lowered the radio. Petro's gone, he said. He left an hour ago. The men at the estate are mine. And Lucien? Still in the east room. He paused. For now. She looked at him. You're going to let him out. I'm going to offer him a choice. He met her eyes. He spent 15 years building something in my house. He spent 15 years inside my operational structure. He knows the Sina network better than anyone I have access to. If he helps us take them apart tonight, you'll deal with him after. I'll decide after. Yes. She thought about it. About Clearfield County, about the forged messages, about Noah at 5 years old singing in a kitchen that wasn't private at all, the sound of his voice coming out of a phone as a threat. She thought about all of it, and she looked at Damien and said, He's your asset to use, but when this is over, he answers for it, Damien said. All of it. I promise you that. She nodded once. Call him, she said. Damien called the estate and gave the instruction, and they drove toward the coast in the dark, and the radio from the scout's net went quiet after a while, which either meant they'd lost the pursuit or the pursuit had gotten smarter and quieter, and both possibilities required the same response, which was to keep moving and not slow down for anything. The shipyard appeared out of the harbor dark 40 minutes later, a complex of piers and warehouses and crane towers that looked abandoned from the road, but wasn't. Lights in 2 of the warehouse windows, vehicles in the north lot, the distant sound of machinery that ran at night because night was when certain kinds of business preferred to operate. Damien made 4 calls from the car. Short, specific, operational. Men he trusted at a level below Lucien, below Petro, the level that hadn't been compromised because nobody had thought it necessary to compromise it. 12 men, converging from 3 directions over the next 20 minutes. Noah stays in the vehicle, Elena said. Yes? With Marcus. Yes. I'm not staying in the vehicle, she said. He looked at her. Don't, she said. You need people who know what they're doing, and I know what I'm doing. I've been keeping him alive for 7 years without any of this. She gestured at the convoy, the radios, the infrastructure. I've done it with nursing shifts and careful planning and a go bag I packed fresh every 6 months. Don't put me in the car with the 7-year-old and tell me to wait. He held her gaze for a long moment. Do you know how to use one of these? He held up a compact handgun. Point and decide, she said. I know the decision part. I'll figure out the pointing. He almost smiled. It was the smallest possible version of a smile, barely there, but she caught it. Stay behind me, he said. Follow my moves, not your instincts. Your instincts are good, but mine are trained for this specific environment. Understood. If I go down, you're not going down. Elena, you're not. She said it with the same manufactured certainty she'd used for Noah on the gravel road, and she watched him receive it the same way Noah had received it, which was to say he didn't believe it but accepted it as the operating premise. She turned to Noah. He was fully awake now, sitting upright, watching her with eyes that were too clear and too old for the face they were in. I need you to stay with Marcus, she said. I know. You stay in this car. You don't open the door for any reason. You don't... Mom. He said it with a patience that broke something in her chest in a clean, precise way. I know. I've been listening. She put her hands on his face. His cheeks were warm. He needed a haircut. She'd been meaning to do it for 2 weeks and hadn't gotten to it, and now here they were. I'll be back, she said. I know you will, he said. You always are. She kissed his forehead and got out of the car. The shipyard smelled of salt water and diesel and the particular rust smell of metal that has been close to the ocean for decades. The pier surface under her feet was uneven, old concrete with gaps, and she picked her footing the way Damien did, deliberate, quiet, close to the warehouse wall where the shadows were densest. Damien's 12 men had made it. She counted them without looking directly at them as they moved into position. Efficient, practiced, not performing professionalism, just being it, which was the difference. The Senna vehicles were in the north lot, 6 of them, which meant 30 men, Damien said quietly beside her. At minimum. You have 12. I have 12 plus you plus leverage. He looked toward the north warehouse. And Lucien. She looked. At the far end of the pier, moving with the careful balance of a man whose hands were no longer restrained but who understood the specific conditions of his current freedom, Lucien Varga was approaching from the waterside. He'd been brought by boat. She hadn't seen that arrangement happen, but understood it was deliberate. Coming by road would have been visible, and Lucien, whatever else he was, understood visible. He stopped when he reached them. He looked at Elena first, then at Damien. The network access point, Damien said. The Senna financial routing. You built it. Yes, Lucien said. You can collapse it. From inside the warehouse. The primary router is in the northeast corner of the main floor. If I access the terminal, he paused. They'll have someone on it. We'll clear it. It'll take 4 minutes to run the sequence. You'll have 4 minutes. Lucien looked at him. And after? After you and I have a very long conversation in a room with no exit. That's the deal, Lucien. Damien's voice was quiet and absolute. You have a choice between that room and what the Senna family does to people who become liabilities. You've just become a liability. Lucien understood. It moved across his face, the understanding, without drama. He nodded. The first shot came from the warehouse roof before any of them had moved. Not aimed at them, aimed at the pier light above them, which exploded and went dark and took most of their sight advantage with it. They knew we were coming, Marcus said in the earpiece. How? Elena started. Petro, Damien said, he told them. He knew about the shipyard. There was no time to process the implication because the north warehouse doors were opening and the math of 30 to 12 was becoming immediately physical and non-theoretical. Damien grabbed her arm and moved, pulling her behind an equipment stack. Compressors. Massive. Old. Bolted to the pier deck, providing actual cover rather than the psychological kind. She pressed against the metal, and it was cold and smelled of oil, and the sounds from the direction of the warehouse were no longer abstract. Lucien had vanished. Where is he? She said. Moving. He knows the layout. Damien was watching 3 angles simultaneously in a way that required a kind of spatial processing she recognized but couldn't replicate. Northeast corner. He's going for the terminal. Alone? 2 of my men are shadowing him. He doesn't know they're there. Because you don't trust him. I trust him to do the part that benefits him. I don't trust the rest. He looked at her. Stay here. You said... I said stay behind me. I need to move, and you can't move the way I need to move right now. Stay here. Stay low. Don't fire unless someone is within 10 feet of you. He was gone before she could argue. She pressed against the compressor and breathed. The sounds of the shipyard reorganized themselves into a kind of broken music. Gunfire in short controlled bursts, not the movie version of continuous noise, but the real version, sporadic and deliberate, each shot a decision. Shouts she couldn't fully parse, the slap of boots on wet concrete, something heavy falling somewhere on the warehouse floor. She counted seconds. 30, 45. A man came around the equipment stack from her left, not one of Damien's. She knew because he was moving toward her, and Damien's men moved toward threats, not toward a woman crouched behind a compressor. She did what Damien had said. She waited until he was inside 10 feet. She pointed, and she decided. The sound was enormous, and her hand came back hard, and the man sat down on the pier deck and didn't get up. She pressed against the compressor again. Her hand was shaking. She let it shake because she didn't have the spare capacity to stop it. 60 seconds. 90. A voice on Damien's radio, which he'd clipped to her jacket before he left. Terminal accessed. Lucien's running the sequence. Then Damien's voice. Hold the northeast, give him the 4 minutes. She looked out from the equipment stack. She could see at the far end of the pier the cargo crane. Pier 7, northern end, the one Damien had mentioned. Its tower rose against the harbor sky with the particular industrial indifference of something built for tonnage, not aesthetics. The cab was dark. The crane arm extended over the water at a slight angle, its counterweight hanging on the landward side. Movement at the base of the crane. 2 figures. Then a third. One of them, she understood from the posture and the specific way the figure moved, the compact, measured movement of someone who had operated in exactly this kind of environment before, was Damien. The other 2 were not his men. She started moving before she'd made a conscious decision to move, which was her instincts doing exactly what Damien had told her not to let them do. And she did it anyway because the alternative was standing still. The pier surface was treacherous, and she went slow and low and made the crane's base in 90 seconds that felt like 9 minutes. She came around the base structure and saw them. Damien had one of the men on the ground. The other had Damien from behind, arm around his throat, a position that was both anatomically efficient and deliberately theatrical, the way people hold someone when they want the person they're holding to witness something. Petro Vescari stepped out from the crane cab ladder. He was bigger than she'd expected from the brief glimpse of his name on a phone screen. Damien's cousin, 12 years of access, 12 years of building the interior foundation of a betrayal. He had the family jaw, the same jaw she'd seen on Damien and had begun to recognize in Noah. But where Damien's face had grown into something considered, Petro's had gone somewhere harder and less negotiated with. He looked at Elena, then at Damien in the chokehold. The chip, Petro said. His accent was slight, Eastern European underneath the American overlay. Give me the chip, and this is over. The data's already uploaded, Elena said. The chip is the source file. Anything transmitted from it can be challenged in court without the physical evidence. He held out his hand. The chip. If I give you the chip, Elena said, what happens to him? He survives. Petro's voice was even. I don't want to kill my cousin. I want to be done with this arrangement and gone. The chip buys that. You're lying, she said. Maybe. He almost smiled. But you don't have a better option. She reached into her coat pocket. She felt the pendant, the chip inside it. 7 years of carrying something without knowing what it was. And now here, on a pier in a shipyard at 11:50 at night, with her hand shaking and the smell of gunpowder and salt water in the air, she was the variable the whole architecture had been built to control. She thought about Noah in the car. She thought about Marcus, who was good at his job. She thought about the upload, 100%, sitting on a server somewhere that wasn't this pier and wasn't anyone's pocket and couldn't be held and couldn't be taken. She pulled the pendant out, held it up. Petro's eyes moved to it. And in the half second that Petro's attention moved from Damien to the pendant, Damien dropped his chin, tucked it hard against the forearm at his throat, rotated left, and drove his elbow back into the ribs of the man holding him with a force that produced a sound she felt rather than heard. The man's grip broke. Damien moved. She would not have been able to describe the sequence afterward in any useful detail. It was too fast and too specific, the product of training she didn't have for circumstances she didn't have language for. But she watched Damien cross the distance to Petro in 3 steps, and she watched Petro reach for something at his hip, and she watched Damien get there first, and the 2 of them went into the crane ladder structure together with the sound of metal and impact, and the specific human noises of a fight that is not performative. The man whose rib she'd heard crack was getting up. She pointed. She decided. He stayed down. Her hand was shaking so hard now the gun rattled against her palm. She pressed it against her thigh to still it. She breathed. She looked at the crane structure where Damien and Petro were moving in and out of shadow, up the ladder, onto the access platform, 2 stories above the pier deck, with the harbor dark below and the crane arm extending over the water and the counterweight swinging slightly on the landward side with the particular patient weight of something that has been hanging in place for years and has developed opinions about staying there. A voice in her earpiece. Financial network down. Lucian ran the sequence. Senna accounts are frozen. Another voice. Encrypted files releasing. All packages. It's going out. She heard it and understood what it meant. The files were going public. Every name, every transaction, 15 years of documentation, moving through channels that didn't require the chip or the laptop or anyone on this pier to survive. It was done. She looked up at the crane platform. Damien had Petro against the railing. Petro had something in his hand. Not a gun. Something smaller. A blade. The economical choice of someone who knew that firearms on a metal platform above open water had specific drawbacks. He drove it toward Damien, and Damien turned it, barely, took a line of it across the forearm that she could see even from below. And the sharp sound he made wasn't a scream, but it was something, a sound that went directly into her sternum and stayed there. Petro drove him back against the crane housing. Damien's hand slipped on the railing. He caught it. One-handed, wrong hand, the arm that had taken the blade, and his grip was uncertain in a way she could read from 30 feet below, and he could not hide. Petro raised the blade. Elena raised the gun. The distance was 30 feet and a 2-story height differential, and her hand was shaking, and she had fired it twice tonight, and both times she had been close enough that the physics were straightforward. This was not straightforward. Petro brought the blade down. She fired. The shot went wide. She knew before it left the barrel, felt the angle wrong. But the sound of it at that range, the close concussive report of it echoing off the crane housing and the pier deck and the water, made Petro flinch left, and that flinch was enough. Damien used the railing, used the crane housing, used his compromised grip and the particular resource of a man who has run out of every advantage except the one where he has more to lose than the person trying to kill him, and he moved. She couldn't see everything that happened in the next 4 seconds. She saw Petro go over the railing. She heard the water. She stood on the pier deck holding a gun with 2 rounds left and looked up at the platform where Damien was holding the railing with both hands and not moving, just holding it, breathing hard enough that she could hear it from below. "Damien," she said. He looked down at her. "Can you get down?" she said. He looked at his arm, at the railing, at the ladder. He made an assessment she could see him making, the specific arithmetic of injury versus what was required. "Yes," he said. He started down the ladder. She watched every rung. He hit the pier deck, and she went to him and looked at his arm, and he let her look, which meant it was bad enough that he decided there was no point managing her reaction. The cut ran from elbow to mid-forearm, deep enough to need attention immediately, not deep enough. She assessed with the part of her brain that was still a nurse, and would apparently always be a nurse, to be immediately catastrophic. "Pressure," she said. She took off her jacket. "Hold still." "The men from the warehouse are—" "Hold still." She pressed the jacket against his arm, and he held it and made a sound through his teeth that he tried to keep small and didn't fully succeed. "The files went out," she said. "I heard it on the radio. Everything." He leaned against the crane housing. His breathing was slowing. She watched it slow. "The Senna network is down," he said. "Without the financial routing, they can't pay the men they've contracted. Without the money, they fall apart," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. His face in the harbor light was tired in a way that went deeper than tonight. "And every name on the list is going to be receiving a very specific package of documentation in about—" He checked his watch with his good arm. 20 minutes, which means their attention is going to be entirely on managing that problem and not on us. She kept pressure on the wound. "Is it over?" He thought about it. Not the answer. She could tell he knew the answer. He was thinking about how to say it. "Lucien still needs to answer," he said. "Yes." "There are people on that list who have legal resources I'm going to be fighting for a long time." "Yes." "And I have to make decisions about what's left of my organization." He looked at her. "None of that is tonight." "No," she said. "Tonight you need stitches, and Noah needs his father to walk back to that car on his own." Something in his face shifted, the particular shift of a word that hasn't been said before landing the first time. Father. Not as an argument or a claim, just as a fact being spoken aloud. "Can you walk?" she said. Yes. Then let's go. She kept her hand on his arm and they walked back down the pier toward the lot where the vehicles waited, and the shipyard was quieter now. The sounds settling into aftermath, and the harbor water was dark, and the crane arm extended over it like a question mark that the night had decided not to answer. And somewhere in the digital infrastructure of 3 continents, 15 years of documentation was finding its way to the people who would spend the next several years deciding what to do with it. Her hand was still shaking. She kept it pressed against Damien's arm and kept walking, and decided the shaking was not her problem right now. And the pier ended and the lot began, and the third SUV was exactly where Marcus had left it. And the rear window was a shape she knew, because Noah had his face pressed against the glass, watching them come. And when he saw them both walking, he put his hand flat on the window in a gesture that was too small and too large at the same time. And Elena looked at Damien, and Damien looked at the window, and neither of them said anything about it because some things didn't have a container yet, and you just carried them until one appeared. The SUV door opened. Marcus said, "Sir, you're bleeding." "I'm aware," Damien said. "We need to, I know." He looked past Marcus at Noah, who was now sitting up straight in the back seat, watching his father with an expression Elena had never seen on his face before, and understood immediately. 7 years old and seeing for the first time what it cost someone to come back. "Give me a minute," Damien said. He got in the car. Noah looked at his arm, at the makeshift bandage, at Damien's face. "Does it hurt?" Noah said. "Yes," Damien said. Noah nodded, very seriously, as if this were important information he'd needed confirmed. Then he moved across the seat and pressed himself against Damien's good side with the uncalculating trust of a child who has made a decision and committed to it entirely. And Damien went very still for a moment, and Elena watched her son lean his head against the side of the man who was his father, and she got into the car and closed the door and let the night hold all of it for a while without asking it to be anything else. Marcus started the engine. "Where to?" he said. Elena looked at Damien. Damien looked at Noah. "Somewhere with a kitchen," Noah said, without opening his eyes. "I want to finish the cake." Marcus put the car in drive. Eyes. "Show more." They found a kitchen. It belonged to a safe house 40 minutes inland, a property that appeared on no organizational roster, purchased through a shell company Damien had registered in his mother's maiden name before she died, and before he'd understood why that kind of precaution mattered. 3 bedrooms, a wood stove that worked, a kitchen with enough counter space that the birthday cake fit on it without crowding anything else. Noah ate 2 slices standing up at the counter at 1 in the morning, while Elena sat 3 feet away pressing a clean dish towel against Damien's arm and waiting for the man Damien had called. A doctor, not a hospital, the kind of arrangement that existed in the margins of the world Damien inhabited, to arrive. "It needs stitches," she said for the 3rd time. "I know," Damien said for the 3rd time. "Saying I know isn't the same as holding still." "I am holding still." "You're holding still the way someone holds still when they're thinking about not holding still." Noah looked over from the counter. "She's right," he said with his mouth full. "You keep doing this thing with your shoulder." Damien looked at his shoulder, stopped doing the thing with his shoulder. "Finish your cake," Elena said. "I am finishing my cake." He took another bite, turned back to the counter, and added quietly to no one in particular, "This is a weird birthday." Nobody argued with that. The doctor arrived at 2:15. He was older, unhurried, the kind of man who had decided decades ago that the hours and the circumstances of his work were not things he was going to have feelings about anymore. He looked at Damien's arm, cleaned it, sutured it with the focused economy of someone for whom this was Tuesday, regardless of what day it actually was, and left without asking questions, which was the professional arrangement. Damien sat at the kitchen table while it happened, jaw set, looking at the wall in the specific way of someone managing pain by giving it a location to go that isn't his face. Elena watched his hand on the table, flat, fingers slightly spread, and watched the fingers press down harder each time the needle went through and come back up when it was done. 12 stitches. When it was finished, he looked at his arm for a moment, then at Elena. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." I have calls to make. They'll keep 2 hours. The names on the list won't keep. They're going to start moving the moment the packages land, and some of them have the resources to... Damien, she said it quietly, the way you say something when you mean it to land and not bounce. He's asleep. Your arm is sutured. The files are out and the network is down and Lucien is contained and whatever comes next is going to require you to be functional. She held his gaze. 2 hours. He looked at her. 2 hours, he said. He slept in the downstairs room with the wood stove. She knew because she checked. What she acknowledged to herself was something she was doing and didn't spend energy justifying. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that went cold and looked at the birthday cake with its missing slices and thought about Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. About the motel with the faded curtains and the gas station across the road and the pharmacy where she'd bought the test and the one after it because she hadn't believed the first result, which was a very human response to information that changes everything. 11 days. He'd found her in 11 days and he'd sat on it, and she'd spent 7 years building a life in an apartment that wasn't private and a town that had been quietly surveilled and a careful loneliness she'd told herself was the right choice. The protective choice. The only choice a mother could make. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The loneliness had been real. She wanted to be clear with herself about that, in the dark kitchen at 2:30 in the morning, before the day came and made clarity harder. The loneliness had been real, and the fear had been real. And the choices she'd made had come from the information she'd had, which had been manipulated and incomplete and shaped by a man who'd been building a throne for 15 years and had used her disappearance as one of the bricks. She wasn't going to carry the weight of those choices as if she'd made them in full information. She was also not going to pretend they hadn't cost anything. Noah had grown up without his father because of a calculation Lucien Varga had made in a motel parking lot in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, in the second week of what should have been a search. That was a cost. It had a number attached to it that she didn't know how to calculate and wasn't going to try to calculate tonight. Tonight she was going to drink her cold coffee and look at the cake and let the number be whatever it was without asking it to be smaller than it was. She was still sitting there when the first light came through the kitchen window. Gray, hesitant, the particular light of early morning that isn't committed to anything yet. She made fresh coffee. Damien came in at 6:15. His arm was in a clean bandage he'd done himself, imperfectly, and she looked at it and didn't offer to redo it because he hadn't asked, and sometimes people needed to manage their own bandages. He sat down. She put a cup in front of him. They sat in silence for a while, which was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of people who have been through something together that doesn't have a quick language yet. "Lucien," she said eventually, "my men are moving him this morning. There's a property in Connecticut, secure, legal holding, the kind of arrangement I've used before for people who need to be kept available for federal interviews." He looked at his cup. The DA's office in New York received the documentation package at 3 a.m. They'll have questions. Lucien has answers. The arrangement is that he provides them. And in exchange, reduced exposure, not immunity. He doesn't get immunity. His voice was flat. He gets the difference between what he did and what they can prove, which is enough for him to decide cooperation is preferable to the alternative. And Petro? They pulled him from the harbor this morning. He's alive. A pause. Injured. He'll recover enough to answer for what he did. I've been informed that the federal package includes his financial records with the Sena family, which makes him a cooperating witness whether he intends to be one or not. She absorbed this. The Sena family itself. Dismantled, he said. Without the financial routing, their contracted personnel stopped working within 6 hours. 2 of their senior figures have already turned on each other. I expect the documentation package will accelerate that. He looked at her. This part is done. She looked at her coffee. And the names, she said. The politicians, the businessman from the hospital fundraiser. Federal jurisdiction, sealed investigations. I've been told to expect indictments within 60 days for the most documented cases. His jaw worked once. Some of them have the resources to delay for years. Some of them will quietly resign and disappear into expensive retirement, and the legal system will call that an acceptable outcome. He paused. I don't call that an acceptable outcome, but I understand that what I want and what the law delivers are not always the same number. No, she said. They're not. He turned his cup in his hands. There are decisions I need to make about the organization, about what's left of it after I cut what needs cutting. He looked at the window. I've been thinking about it for 3 years. Not because of last night, before last night. The legitimate businesses, the foundations, the restructure I've been planning. He paused. I think I've been using the planning as a reason not to do it, because doing it means deciding that what I built and what my father built before me and what it cost everyone who was close to it, that all of it ends. That there's nothing on the other side of it except what I build next, which is smaller and quieter and doesn't have the same kind of power. Another pause, shorter. I think I've been afraid of what I am without the power. She looked at him. What are you? He was quiet. Without the organization, she said. Without the infrastructure. Without Lucien running operations and Marcus running security and 15 years of empire. What are you? He held her gaze. I don't know yet. That's the most honest thing you've said since you showed up on my porch. He almost did the smile again. The bar was low. It was, she agreed. They finished their coffee. Noah came downstairs at 7:30 with his hair in a condition that suggested the pillow had made decisions without consulting him, wearing the same clothes he'd slept in, carrying one of the books from the shipyard house's shelf that he'd apparently transferred to his bag at some point during the evacuation. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at both of them sitting at the table. You both look terrible, he said. Thank you, Damien said. Did you sleep? Some. Noah came and sat in the third chair, set the book on the table. It was about the construction of early 20th century cargo vessels, which clarified certain things about him, and looked at them both with the particular directness he'd been using since the previous morning, the one that Elena had stopped trying to redirect because it was clearly structural. Are you going to tell me what's happening? He said. All of it. Not the version where you skip the parts you think I can't handle. Elena looked at Damien. Damien looked at her. The look lasted long enough to be a conversation. She turned to Noah. Yes, she said. We are. It took 2 hours. She told it straight, the way she'd promised herself she would. No softening the architecture, no rounding the corners. She told him about New York, about Damien, about the decision she'd made in a motel bathroom in Pennsylvania with incomplete information and real fear and genuine love for a child who existed only as a possibility at that point. She told him about the 7 years, the cities, the careful disappearance. She told him about Lucien, about what he'd built and why, about the pendant and the chip and what they contained. She told him about what had happened at the shipyard in the kind of language that a 7-year-old could hold, not sanitized, but proportionate. He'd been in the car. He'd heard the sounds. He was not going to be protected from the shape of what had happened by a description that didn't fit what he'd experienced. Damien filled in the parts she left space for. He did it without performing contrition and without over-explaining himself, which was the right call. Noah was watching him the whole time with the particular attention of someone who is not just listening to the content, but auditing the delivery for accuracy. When it was finished, Noah was quiet for a while. He looked at the book on the table, ran his finger along the spine. So you didn't know about me, he said to Damien. Not until now. No, Damien said. And you looked for us. For 7 years. But the man, Lucien, he made sure you couldn't find us. Yes. Noah thought about this. That's really not okay, he said. No, it's not. Are you going to... He stopped, started again with different words. What happens to him? He answers for what he did, Damien said, in front of the people whose job it is to decide what that costs him. I'm not the one who decides that. Noah looked at him. But you could. A pause. I could, Damien said. I'm choosing not to. Why? Damien looked at the table for a moment. Because there's a version of me that would have, and I'm trying to not be that version anymore. And the only way to actually not be it is to actually not do it, even when I could. Noah absorbed this with the seriousness it deserved. Then he looked at Elena. And you're not mad at him? At Dad? The word landed in the kitchen and stayed there, not dramatically, just with the weight of a first time. Elena looked at her son. "I was mad," she said. "I had a lot of information that was wrong, and I made decisions from that information, and being mad at the information doesn't go anywhere useful, so I'm trying to be mad at the right things." "Lucien," Noah said. "Lucian," she agreed. "And the system that made it possible for one person to control that much." She paused. "And a little bit myself for not asking more questions 7 years ago. But that one I'm working on." Noah looked at Damien again. Something moved through the boy's face that was not simple. It wasn't forgiving, and it wasn't withholding, and it wasn't any of the clean categories that adults sometimes tried to assign children's emotional processing because it was tidier that way. "I don't know you," Noah said to Damien. "You know that, right?" "I don't know you at all." "I know," Damien said. "So you can't just be my dad. You have to—" He frowned, looking for the word. "You have to become it. Like, you have to do the work." Damien looked at the boy for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "That's right." "Okay." Noah picked up his book. "Then we should probably start." He flipped it open to a page he'd folded down. "Do you know anything about how they built cargo ships in 1920? Because there's this part about the crane systems that I don't understand, and I think you probably know about cranes now." Something happened in Damien's face. Elena caught it and looked away, because it was the kind of thing you didn't watch directly. "Show me," Damien said. Noah showed him. The next 3 weeks were not simple. They were not the version of an ending where the complicated things become uncomplicated because the crisis has passed. Elena had spent enough of her adult life in ICS watching families navigate the aftermath of catastrophic events to know that the storm ending and the damage being gone were not the same moment and often weren't even in the same season. She took Noah back to the coastal town on the 4th day because he had school, and because the men who had wanted something from them no longer had an organization capable of sending anyone, and because she understood that keeping him in a safe house indefinitely was its own kind of damage. The house had a broken back door and a backyard that needed explaining to the neighbors. She fixed the door herself with a kit from the hardware store, which took 3 times as long as it should have, and resulted in a frame that was functional, if not beautiful. And she decided functional was sufficient. She sat Mrs. Heller down across the street and told her a version of events that was truthful in its outline and proportionate in its detail. Mrs. Heller listened without interrupting, which was not her usual approach, and when Elena finished, she said, "The man with the cars, is he going to be around?" And Elena said she didn't know yet. And Mrs. Heller said, "He looked like he was trying very hard." Elena said, "He was." And Mrs. Heller said, "That counts for something, in my experience." And that was the end of that conversation. Damien came on the weekends. He didn't move in. He didn't suggest it. He came on Saturday mornings with coffee from the place on the Harbor Road that he'd figured out she liked and Noah had decided he also liked, which was a 7-year-old's way of building bridges, and she respected the methodology. He and Noah sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours the first Saturday with the cargo ship book. The second Saturday, Noah had moved on to a book about harbor engineering, which had led to a conversation about the crane at the shipyard that Elena had left the room for, and later, Noah had come to tell her that he understood now why his dad had known about the counterweight mechanism. And she had said that was good, and Noah had said he thought maybe his dad was actually kind of good at some things, and she had said yes, she thought so too, and they had both understood the enormous incompleteness of that sentence and left it there for now. The federal cases began to move. The first sealed indictment was issued in the 4th week. A state senator from New Jersey whose financial records showed a 12-year relationship with Damien's organization that had included the routing of campaign funds through a series of shell accounts, the documentation package mapped to the precise dollar. His office released a statement within hours describing the charges as politically motivated. 2 days later, a second indictment followed for a technology executive whose company had been using Damien's logistics infrastructure to move equipment through customs channels that didn't bear close examination. His lawyers issued no statement, and he was photographed boarding a private flight that was subsequently grounded by federal order. Elena read the news reports the way she read everything, carefully, checking her own reactions for the places where emotion was running faster than information. She felt the satisfaction, and she didn't apologize for it, and she also noted that satisfaction wasn't the same as resolution and didn't try to make it be. She called Damien after the second indictment. 3 more in the next week, he said. My lawyer has been told to expect the committee investigations to go public before the end of the month. And you? A pause. My exposure is complicated. I've been cooperating with the federal investigation for 3 years. There's a sealed cooperation agreement that predates last week. The documentation I provided through that agreement is part of what made the package credible. Another pause. There will be proceedings. There will be things I have to answer for. I'm not going to pretend that isn't true. How long? My lawyer thinks the cooperation agreement protects me from the serious exposure, civil forfeitures, some financial penalties, ongoing oversight of the legitimate operations, not prison. He said the last part without inflection, which told her it had been a real question until recently. Not prison, she exhaled. You should have told me that before the pause, she said. I know. I wanted to say the honest part first. She sat with that for a moment. The organization. The violent operational branches are dissolved. I signed the orders yesterday. What's left is the legitimate businesses, the 3 foundations, and the legal restructure I've been working toward. He paused. It's smaller, quieter. It doesn't have the same power, she said. Yes. How does that feel? A longer pause this time. Like taking off something heavy that I wore so long, I stopped noticing the weight. He paused again. And like not knowing what my posture looks like without it yet. She looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the fence she'd built 2 years ago that was slightly crooked from where she'd rushed the post setting. You'll figure it out, she said. Will I? You figured out the crane counterweight mechanism in 1920 cargo ships well enough to explain it to a 7-year-old. He was quiet for a moment. He's extraordinary. Yes, she said. He is. You did that. We did it, she said, just on a slightly uneven schedule. The Lucian matter resolved itself over 2 months in the way that legal matters resolved, when a man had specific information that multiple investigative agencies needed and the intelligence to understand that his cooperation was his only remaining currency. He gave testimony in 4 separate proceedings. He provided documentation that confirmed and extended the records on the chip. He answered questions for federal prosecutors and a joint task force, and in a closed session she learned about afterward, for a congressional subcommittee that had been investigating the infrastructure of political corruption for 3 years and had needed exactly the kind of interior operational knowledge that Lucian possessed. He received, in the end, a sentence that reflected his cooperation and also, without equivocation, what he had done. 8 years, reduced from 22 by the cooperation agreement, in a federal facility in upstate New York. Elena learned the number on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in her kitchen with her phone in her hand and the window showing a backyard full of leaves she hadn't gotten around to raking. She stood there for a while. 8 years was not 7. She was aware of the arithmetic. She raked the leaves that afternoon, all of them, the whole yard, every corner, and she put the bags at the curb and came inside and washed her hands and stood at the sink looking at the water run clear and thought about what she was supposed to feel and whether feeling it correctly mattered. She felt what she felt. It didn't have a clean name. She let it be nameless and moved on. Damien heard the number at the same time. He didn't call. He came, which was the right call, and he brought nothing because there wasn't anything to bring, and he understood that. He sat at her kitchen table. She sat across from him. 8 years, she said. Yes. For 7 years of manipulation, surveillance, forgery, and contracting a kill order. The sentencing guidelines, I know what the guidelines say. I'm not asking about the guidelines. I'm telling you what the number feels like. He was quiet. It feels insufficient, she said. And I know that doesn't change it. I know what the cooperation agreement means, and I know what it bought, and I know the information he provided is going to result in prison time for people whose reach would have been very hard to break otherwise. I know the math is correct. She looked at her hands on the table. It still feels insufficient. Yes, he said. You feel it too. Every day, he said. Some of it is about you. A lot of it is about Noah. A lot of it is about the 15 years I spent trusting a man who was cataloging my vulnerabilities while handing me advice. He looked at the table. I'll feel it for a long time. I've decided that's appropriate, that I should feel it for a long time. He looked up. What I won't do is carry it as the main thing. Because I've seen what men look like when they carry that as the main thing and it becomes the only thing, and everything else, everyone else, is just weather around it. She looked at him. When did you figure that out? She said. A 7-year-old explained it to me, he said. Not in those words, but the general principle. She did something she hadn't done in a long time, not in front of him. She laughed, not a polite laugh, not a managed response, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere lower than her chest. He looked at her when she laughed, the way you look at something you've been waiting to see. Noah's 8th birthday was in March. They planned it 6 weeks out because Noah had views about planning and had produced, without being asked, a written list of preferences organized by category, which Elena had photographed and sent to Damien with the message, "He gets this from you, just so you know." Damien had replied, "I was going to say the same thing to you." The party was on a Saturday. The house on the coastal street backyard, the fence Elena had fixed after the birthday that had changed everything. Balloons in the colors Noah had once again specified with precision. A cake from the bakery on the Harbor Road because Noah had declared, with the authority of someone who had eaten a great deal of cake under extraordinary circumstances, that the bakery's version was superior to the homemade version, and this was not a criticism of his mother but a statement of fact. There were children from school, a teacher who had become something like a family friend, Mrs. Heller, who came for 30 minutes and drank lemonade and watched the proceedings with the particular satisfaction of someone who had invested interest in an outcome. Marcus came. He stood near the fence with a paper cup of lemonade and watched the children with an expression that suggested he had recalibrated his professional assessment of lemonade in the last year to include it as a viable beverage. Vera came from the estate. She brought a casserole that nobody had asked for but that fed 12 people without effort, which was either planning or experience, and was probably both. Damien stood at the edge of the yard for a while, watching, the way he'd learned to watch things in the last year, not with the assessment he used to apply to rooms and people and angles and exits, but with something quieter. He was learning the difference. Elena could see him learning it. Noah found him eventually. "Come on," Noah said, with the impatience of a child whose party is happening and whose father is standing at the wrong end of it. "I'm coming," Damien said. "You're standing there like you're waiting for something." "I'm not waiting for anything." "Then come." He came. Elena watched them from the back steps. Damien folded himself onto the grass with the careful management of a man who had learned that his body had opinions now that it hadn't had before, settled beside Noah and the two friends who were explaining the rules of a game that appeared to have been invented in the last 10 minutes and bore no relationship to any game that had existed previously, and he listened to the rules with the complete attention he gave to things he'd decided deserved it. The afternoon went the way good afternoons went, unevenly, with minor conflicts and surprising moments of grace, and the particular background noise of people being in proximity to each other and tolerating it better than expected. When the guests had gone and the yard was in the specific, beautiful wreckage of a used party, Noah sat on the back steps between his parents and ate the last piece of cake off a paper plate and watched the harbor where the light was going pink and horizontal. "Better than last year," he said. "That's a low bar," Elena said. "I know." He ate another bite. But still. They sat there. The harbor water was doing what harbor water did in the late afternoon, catching the light in a way that made it look like it was trying to tell you something, which Elena had always thought was one of the less useful qualities of harbor water, though she'd never stopped looking. "Next year," Noah said, "I want to go somewhere, for my birthday. Like a trip." "Where?" Damien said. Noah thought, "Somewhere with a crane, a real one. That still works." Damien looked at him. "Why a crane?" "Because you know about them now." Noah said it plainly, the way he said most things, without decoration, just the fact sitting there in the air. "And I want to know about them too. And you can't really understand something from a book." Damien was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "You can't." Elena looked at the harbor. The light was almost gone now, the pink thinning into the gray that came before dark. On the water, the running lights of a cargo vessel were moving slow and purposeful through the channel, the way large things moved when they had weight behind them and somewhere specific to go. She thought about the pendant. It was in a drawer in her bedroom, without the chip, which had been surrendered as evidence and would eventually be returned once the proceedings closed, which her lawyer estimated was 18 months out. The pendant itself, dark metal, slightly asymmetrical, the back panel she'd finally learned to open, she'd kept. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she'd carried it for 7 years and it had become part of the weight distribution of her life, and removing it entirely felt like a recalibration she wasn't ready for. Maybe because some things you carry become yours even when they started as someone else's. Damien's hand was on the step between them, not on her hand, just near it. The specific geography of two people who had survived something together and were figuring out what the territory looked like afterward, where the borders were, what was shared and what was still being negotiated. She put her hand over his. He turned his hand over, held hers. Noah, between them, eating the last bite of his cake, looked at the harbor and said nothing, which was how he handled things he'd decided to accept, not with commentary, just with the weight of his own small attention. "The fireworks are later," he said eventually. "The harbor ones, 11 o'clock. "That's past your bedtime," Elena said. "Mom." "By 2 hours." "It's my birthday." "It was your birthday for the entire day." "The day doesn't end at 9. He looked at her with the particular expression of a child making a point he's confident about. "That's not how days work." She looked at Damien. Damien looked at her. "He's right," Damien said. "That's not how days work." "You're not helping." "I'm being accurate." "They're the same thing to you, I've noticed. Is that a problem?" She looked at him, at the lines at the corners of his eyes that were the same ones she'd noticed on her porch a year ago, and had filed under things that had changed. The ones she'd spent a year learning belonged to a version of him that had been trying to get to this back step for a long time, and had taken the long way, and paid for it accordingly. "No," she said. "It's not a problem." They stayed on the steps until the dark came in full and the harbor settled into its nighttime version. Quieter, more honest somehow. And Noah ate the very last frosting remnant off the plate with his finger and didn't apologize for it, and the cargo vessel's running lights moved through the channel, slow and steady, and eventually disappeared around the headland toward wherever it was going. At 11, they walked down to the harbor. Noah walked between them, not because anyone had arranged it, but because that was how it happened. The three of them on the harbor road in the dark with the wooden docks creaking and the smell of the water and the particular quality of a small coastal town at night that has made its peace with the sea and mostly trusts it. The fireworks started on time. They came off a barge anchored in the middle of the channel. The kind of fireworks that were bigger than you expected from the beach, and made Noah's face do the thing it did when he was trying to not look impressed but couldn't help it. He tilted his head back and his mouth opened slightly, and he watched them with his whole body the way children watched things before they learned to watch things with less of themselves. Elena watched the fireworks and also watched her son watching the fireworks, which was the better show. She was aware of Damien beside her, the shoulder of his jacket against hers, the careful, deliberate way he was present. Not performing presence, just being it, the way she'd watched him practice being it over the last year. Learning the difference between the kind of authority that controlled rooms and the kind that made space in them. A particularly large one went off over the harbor, white and wide, lighting the water below it so briefly and completely that for 1 second the whole channel was silver and you could see the depths. Noah made a sound that was not a word. Then he looked up at Damien. "Can you see the reflection?" he said. "Yes," Damien said. "It looks different from the reflection, bigger." Sometimes things do. Noah thought about this. Accepted it. Looked back at the water. The fireworks ran their course the way fireworks did. Building, and then the finale that announced itself as a finale by being more than everything before it. the harbor going white and gold, and the sound rolling back off the water in a way that you felt in your chest cavity. And Noah grabbed Elena's hand without looking at her, and she held it, and he held back hard. And then it was over, and the harbor was very dark and very quiet in the way that only exists right after something has been very loud. The silence that's actually louder than the noise. Noah exhaled. "Okay," he said. "That was good." "Yeah," Elena said. "It was." They walked back. She held Noah's hand and Damien walked on his other side, close enough that she could hear him breathing, and the harbor road was quiet, and the boats in the slips were dark shapes on the water, and the summer night was the warm, heavy kind that made everything feel like it had slowed to the right speed. At the house, she put Noah to bed. He was asleep before she'd finished pulling the blanket up, his face doing the thing it did in sleep, settling into a version of itself that was younger and older at the same time, the private face of a person who had decided the world could be trusted for the next few hours. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she came back downstairs. Damien was in the kitchen. He'd made tea, which was something he'd started doing in the last few months, as if somewhere in the dissolution of the empire he'd arrived at the conclusion that tea was a reasonable thing for a person to make at 11:30 at night. He pushed a cup toward her when she came in. She sat down. They drank their tea. "He's asleep," she said. "I figured." He didn't even argue about the time. The fireworks wore him out. The entire year wore him out. She looked at her cup. "He's good, though. She stopped. "He's going to be fine. I think he's going to be really fine." "Yes," Damien said. "He is." She looked at him across the table. The kitchen light was low and his face was the tired face of someone who had been through a year that had cost him the comfortable certainties he'd operated on for a decade and a half, and was building something else in the space where they'd been, slower, with fewer shortcuts. The way you built something when you finally understood that the shortcuts were what had made the first version structurally unsound. "Stay," she said. He looked at her. "Not like—" She stopped, started again. "I mean, stay tonight. We have a guest room that's been a guest room for 8 months, and you've been driving back and forth from the city every weekend, and it's 11:30. She held his gaze. "Stay. Have breakfast with him in the morning. He'll want to tell you something about cargo ships at 6 a.m., whether or not you've slept, and you might as well be here for it." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That's it? Just okay?" "You told me to stop over-explaining things." She had told him that. 3 months ago, on the back steps, on an afternoon when they'd been sitting with coffee, and he'd spent 4 minutes explaining something that needed 1 sentence. "I did," she said. "Good." She washed the cups. He turned off the kitchen light. They stood in the dark kitchen for a moment, which was also not uncomfortable. And then she went upstairs and he went upstairs, and the house settled around them the way houses settled when they'd been inhabited long enough to have opinions about who was in them. She lay in her room and looked at the ceiling and listened to the harbor, which was doing what it always did at this hour, moving, patient, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last year, and entirely unconcerned about what happened next, because water didn't organize itself around human timelines, and never had. She thought about the motel in Pennsylvania. She thought about the gas station across the road, and the pharmacy, and the morning light on the curtains, and the test on the bathroom sink, and the specific quality of that fear, which had been a fear about the future and everything it might cost. She thought about what the future had actually cost. The numbers, the cities, the years. She thought about what it had produced. She turned on her side. Through the wall she could hear nothing, which meant Damien was either already asleep or managing himself quietly, and either way it was a sound she had room for. Down the hall, Noah breathed in the uncomplicated way of people who had decided the world was basically okay for tonight, and could be addressed again in the morning. She closed her eyes. The harbor moved. The house held. She slept.